They laughed at the janitor, calling him Sergeant Mop like it was a joke. But they had no idea who he really was until a black SUV rolled into the academy, and the highest-ranking general in the country stepped out, locked eyes with the old man, and saluted first. What happened next silenced the entire parade ground. Welcome to Storytelling and Beyond, where real respect is earned in silence, and legacies are written in quiet service. The sun rose slowly behind Jefferson Military Academy, casting golden rays across its sharp stone arches and red brick walls. Inside those walls walked boys in uniform, buzzed heads, straight backs, polished boots. They were cadets, full of youth and pride, dreaming of medals and stripes. They passed through the hallways with purpose, chests puffed, eyes ahead. But none of them noticed the old man mopping the floor in the west corridor. His name was Walter Grayson. No one asked that, of course. To most cadets, he was just the janitor. The guy who smelled like floor polish and wintergreen balm, who always wore the same faded blue uniform and cap that drooped just above his tired eyes. He arrived before reveille, left after taps, and no one remembered a time he wasn't there. They called him Sergeant Mop. It started as a joke, a pun from some cocky third year who thought himself clever. The name stuck like dust in the vents. Sergeant Mop reporting for duty, they'd shout, mock saluting as he passed with his broom. Some cadets even made a game of tossing crumpled paper in his path, just to see if he'd pick it up without protest. He always did. Walter never barked. Never scolded. Never even looked them in the eye. He just kept moving, mop in hand, like time itself couldn't stop him. But Thomas Rivera, a quiet freshman from El Paso, noticed things others didn't. He noticed the precision with which Walter moved, how he cleaned corners like he was carving something sacred. He noticed how Walter once stopped to help a freshman tie his neckerchief before inspection, guiding the folds with gentle fingers like he'd done it 1,000 times. And he noticed something in the old man's gait, a stiffness in the shoulders, a limp in the left leg. It wasn't just age. It was training. Muscle memory. Discipline. One frosted morning, Thomas had forgotten his ID card and stood shivering outside the East Wing doors. The keypad beeped red. Locked. From inside, a shadow moved. Walter appeared, mop in hand, and opened the door without a word. "Thanks, sir," Thomas said reflexively. Walter looked at him for the first time. His eyes were sharp beneath the wrinkles. "No sir needed," he said softly. "Just pay it forward, someday." It sounded like a simple phrase. But it wasn't. Not coming from him. Thomas turned back, curious. "Have you served, sir?" Walter gave a half-smile, then turned away. No one worth saluting remembers why they were. And with that, he pushed his mop back into the hall, leaving only the squeak of rubber wheels on linoleum. At the time, Thomas didn't understand what he meant. But something inside him stirred. Respect. Quiet curiosity. He started watching Walter, not as a janitor, but as someone with a story that hadn't been told. The academy taught its cadets that honor came from rank. From medals, and orders, and barked commands. But Walter? He never raised his voice. He never asked for thanks. He simply showed up, day after day. And in that silence, he was building a legacy no one could yet see. Not until the day a 4-star general drove through the front gate. The day started like any other. Morning drills echoed across the academy courtyard, cadets marched in line, boots clashing with the earth in perfect rhythm. The sky was a polished blue, the flags fluttering crisply above. Inside the mess hall, chatter buzzed with typical bravado. Talk of test scores, weekend leave, and who would make squad leader by spring. But then it happened. At precisely 0900 hours, a convoy of black SUVs rolled through the iron gates of Jefferson Military Academy. A rare sight, and one that sent a ripple of murmurs through the courtyard. The vehicles were military grade. Their windows dark, their tires clean despite the gravel lot. Security stepped out first, scanning the perimeter with eagle eyes. Then, from the center SUV, a man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a navy blue service uniform glinting with rows of brass and silver stars. General Douglas E. Maddox. 4-star General. Supreme Allied Commander. Decorated hero of 3 continents. He hadn't visited a military academy in years. His presence alone was enough to stop time. Every cadet stiffened. Instructors rushed to gather ranks. The commandant himself walked briskly to the courtyard with a forced smile plastered on his face. General Maddox barely acknowledged them. His eyes were searching, sweeping the campus like a satellite scanning for something far beyond ranks and medals. And then he saw him. There, behind the formation, pushing a yellow mop bucket down the far corridor, unaware of the attention he was about to receive, stood Walter Grayson. The general's gait changed. Without a word, without waiting for protocol, General Maddox strode past the commandant, past the stunned instructors, past the line cadets, and walked directly toward the janitor. Every breath in the courtyard froze. Walter was turning a corner when he paused. He sensed it, maybe. The shift in the air. The silence pressing down on the moment. He turned, and their eyes met. General Maddox stopped 2 feet away from the old man, clicked his boots together, straightened his spine, and in front of the entire student body, the staff, and a dozen flabbergasted officers, he saluted. A full, formal salute. Sharp. Respectful. Without hesitation. Walter blinked. Slowly, his hand rose in return, not robotic, but smooth, dignified. The kind of salute that had weight behind it. History. Memory. Gasps echoed like thunderclaps through the courtyard. The general broke into a soft smile. Sergeant Major Walter Grayson, he said, his voice firm but reverent. You don't write history in ink, you mop it up in blood, sweat, and silence. Walter looked down for a moment, then back up. I told you not to call me that anymore, Doug. The cadet's mouths dropped. Doug? The 4-star general's name, spoken like that? General Maddox laughed gently. And I told you I'd never forget what you did for my platoon. He turned to the crowd. This man saved 46 soldiers in Cunner Valley. When our radio died and the enemy had us surrounded, it was Sergeant Grayson who ran 4 miles through gunfire to call an extraction. He was wounded, twice. Didn't stop. Gasps turned to stunned silence. His orders were classified. His service records lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. But make no mistake, without him, I wouldn't be here. None of my men would be. Whispers raced through the crowd like wildfire. He was a janitor? No way. He saved a general? But General Maddox wasn't finished. He turned back to Walter. I requested today's visit. Not to inspect this academy, but to pay respect to a man who showed me what honor really means. Walter didn't smile. He just looked at the cadets, at the young men who'd mocked him, ignored him, stepped over the mop bucket like it didn't matter. And then, for the first time in years, he spoke to them directly. Don't measure a man by the shine on his boots, but by the dirt he's willing to walk through for others. And with that, he walked back into the hallway, mop in hand, leaving behind a generation forever changed by the weight of his quiet legacy. The following day, the atmosphere at Jefferson Military Academy felt different. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors of the academy's mess hall. But no one was talking about breakfast or weekend leave. No, today, the chatter was something else entirely, something far heavier, far more profound. Walter Grayson was the talk of the campus. Cadets walked in groups, murmuring about the incident. It wasn't just gossip, it was a shift in perspective. The hero they had mocked yesterday was now the symbol of something far greater. Respect. Integrity. Humility. As for Walter, he had returned to his duties, doing what he had always done, quietly. No fanfare. No rush to explain himself. The mop bucket, the broom, the rags were all just as important to him as they had been before the general's visit. But now, there was something different in the air. A ripple of recognition. An unspoken understanding that this man, this janitor, was no longer invisible. Across the campus, however, the cadets who had mocked him, the ones who had sneered at him just the day before, now found themselves struggling to make sense of what had happened. Cadet Matthew Brooks, a senior who had often made Walter the target of his jokes, walked slowly across the campus, his boots dragging with a sense of unease. He had been one of the loudest to laugh when the old janitor had entered the mess hall to sweep. But now, there was a gnawing feeling in his chest. He didn't expect to see General Maddox again for the rest of his career at the academy. A man like that, with his years of experience and legendary status, didn't typically show up on the campus for any reason other than business. Yet today, the general had come and left with a simple truth: you don't have to be famous to be a hero. As Brooks walked past the row of classrooms, he saw Walter again, mopping the floors in the hallway. The janitor worked at a steady, quiet pace, his face calm, unaffected by the ripple of attention that followed him. The cadets, whether out of curiosity or remorse, were starting to take notice. Brooks hesitated, his steps faltering as he got closer to Walter. Something shifted in him. A lesson had been imparted, whether he liked it or not. Without thinking, he approached Walter. "Hey, he began, his voice uncertain. The words were harder to say than he expected. Walter paused, turning his head to look at the young man. His gaze wasn't accusing, nor was it cold. It was simply calm, steady, like the gaze of someone who had lived long enough to understand that some things were better left unspoken. Brooks cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize for, well, what happened yesterday." His shoulders slumped. "We didn't know. I didn't know." Walter nodded once, his expression unreadable, but there was a soft light in his eyes. He leaned the mop against the wall and took a step toward Brooks. "Son," Walter said, his voice gruff yet kind, "there's no shame in not knowing. We all start somewhere. But the moment you stop learning, that's when you lose the real fight." Brooks swallowed, the weight of the words settling on him like a thick fog. For a moment, he just stood there, unsure of what to say next. But the older man didn't press him for more. He didn't need to. The lesson had been taught, not with words, but with actions. With his quiet dignity. His humility. His courage in the face of mockery. And in that silence, Brooks felt something inside himself shift. Later that evening, after dinner had been served and cadets had begun to gather for their evening formation, the entire student body gathered in the courtyard. It wasn't an official formation, just a group of young men, each trying to process what they had witnessed. They weren't just thinking about Walter Grayson anymore. They were thinking about themselves. About their actions. About the man they had failed to recognize before. One by one, a few cadets who had mocked Walter walked up to him. Each of them offering a simple word or gesture of respect. "I'm sorry," one would say, holding out his hand. Walter would shake it firmly, his face softened by a modest smile. The atmosphere was heavy with reflection. There were no speeches. No grand proclamations. Just the shared understanding that the day before, they had witnessed a lesson in real leadership, not from the four-star general, but from the quiet janitor. As the evening drew to a close, and the last cadets trickled into their barracks, Walter remained alone in the courtyard, staring up at the stars. Somewhere, deep in his soul, he understood. Leadership wasn't about titles. It wasn't about medals or ranks. It wasn't even about the battles fought on foreign soil. Leadership, true leadership, was about doing what was right when no one was watching. It was about showing up, day after day, with integrity, regardless of the circumstances. Walter Grayson had never needed recognition. But now, it had come. Not in the form of applause or accolades, but in the form of respect earned, not demanded. And as the wind blew softly across the academy grounds, Walter whispered to himself, it was always enough. The ceremony had ended, but the silence in the academy courtyard lingered, thick with a mixture of awe and regret. Cadets who once smirked and rolled their eyes when they saw the janitor now stood frozen, their faces pale as the magnitude of what they had just witnessed slowly sank in. Mr. Leonard Gaines, Sergeant Mop to the mocking students, quietly moved to his small janitor's closet, the echo of the general's salute still ringing in everyone's ears. But as he reached for the door handle, something changed. "Sir!" A young cadet's voice cracked the silence. Leonard turned slowly. The same cadet who once laughed the loudest stepped forward, his cap in his hands, head slightly bowed. "Mr. Gaines. I had no idea. I'm sorry." Leonard studied the young man's face. There was sincerity in his eyes, shame, even. Then another cadet came forward. Then two more. One by one, they gathered around the old man who, for them, had been invisible, just part of the background. But now they saw him. Truly saw him. "You fought for this country?" "I didn't just fight," a voice said from behind them. It was the general, who had lingered on purpose. Leonard Gaines led a unit that saved the lives of 34 men under impossible fire. He carried 3 wounded comrades on his back. He bled for them, for all of us. And when he came home, he didn't look for medals or money. He came here to clean up after kids who didn't know better. There were tears in Leonard's eyes now, but he stood tall. "I didn't come here for recognition," he said quietly. "I came here because I believe in building people." Quietly, humbly. Even if it's just giving them a clean hallway to walk through on their way to becoming leaders. The cadets were silent, some swallowing hard, others wiping their eyes. The next morning, a bronze plaque appeared on the wall near the main entrance. In honor of Sergeant Leonard Gaines, a true American hero who chose humility over glory. The janitor's closet was converted into a small memorial room with photos, medals, and stories from his military service. Leonard didn't ask for it, but he accepted it with a quiet nod and a grateful smile. Respect was no longer demanded. It had been earned, and finally given. This is Storytelling and Beyond, where every quiet life holds a powerful truth. Subscribe for more heartfelt journeys like this one.